Welcome to Stop It, the only organ-based podcast where you're going to hear the names Wayne Marshall and Phil Kelsall in the same sentence.
Stop it! Stop it! STOP, new word, 19. Stop it! Well, then stop it.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Stop It. I am Jerry Martin, and I am a middle-aged organist.
I am Fraser Gardshaw, and I am an even more middle-aged organist. Hello, everybody.
And I'm Aaron Shows, and I don't know if I like the word middle-aged. I feel like that's like a 1200s Europe kind of thing.
You're not
I would
there
say
yet.
That's the Middle Ages to me. Anyway, I am not middle-aged, so there we go.
Well, I think as is becoming our tradition, one of the things we like to do is go around the table and see what's been happening since last time we recorded one of these podcasts.
Tradition.
So-
We've only done 2 of these things. Surely a tradition is like after 10 or something.
I don't know. I think it's a tradition now, as is tradition. So, Fraser, let's start at the top. What have you been up to since last we chatted?
Absolutely nothing. No, that's not true at all, actually. Since we last chatted, what have I been up to? Well, I hosted a little sort of online YouTube festival on the channel, which was, I think it was very, very well received. It seemed to be very well received. We had a few very fun concerts, one of which was a silent film accompaniment, which this time I did not perform on a theatre organ sample set. I performed it on a classical organ. I actually performed it on the organ of Düsseldorf, St. Lambertus in Düsseldorf. And the film in question was the wonderful silent classic from 1924, Nosferatu. It was great fun. I loved doing it. And I think it went down very well. The audience seemed to enjoy it. And that was my favorite concert of that little festival. We also had an international competition with entrants from all around the world to find the Garcho Gang Superstar 2024. And that was a fun night. We had, how many entries did we have at the end? It was 18 or 19 entries at the end. 18, I think.
That was so much fun.
Yes, it was 18. It was someone pulled out at the last minute. That's right. It was 18 entries, and everyone performed something rather fun. There was a very eclectic mix of things. We had organs, we had pianos, we had tin whistles, we had Chinese flutes, we had bass guitars, we had synthesizers, we had all sorts of things. We even had some organists. And it was a very, very fun evening. And the grand prize, everyone in the audience got to vote for their favorite performer. And the grand prize went to a young American chap called Charles Reardon. Congratulations, Charles. Very, very well done indeed. The runner-up prize went to another young American chap called William Tan, over in Richmond, Virginia, as far as I remember. And the third prize is going to stay here in Germany. That went to a young girl down in the south of Germany, Steffi Wunderlich. And it was all good. They were all playing the organ, funnily enough, the winners.
Wow.
So just goes to show maybe the organ is more popular than we thought. But then again, I have an organ audience on an organ channel. So maybe that's why. What else have I been up to? To be honest, not very much at all. The church scene is very quiet at the moment. We're about to have a new priest installed. Is that the official word these days? He's actually been installed this weekend. At the time of recording, it's coming up to Pentecost. He's going to be installed this weekend. And we're looking forward to that because he's a young, I would say, positively traditional priest, and I'm looking forward to working together with him. So that's coming up this weekend. We've been working towards that to make that a rather exciting occasion. And apart from that, I've just been a stay-at-home dad looking after my 1-year-old daughter. Aaron, what have you been up to?
Well, gosh. So you've had basically the Eurovision contest at your place. It's the Garchorvision contest. It sounds like.
I like that. Yes.
Yeah.
And it was so much more fun than the Eurovision. If you ask me, I would watch the Garchorvision all day long.
I think watching paint dry is more exciting than Eurovision these days, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you have all those countries coming together, coming together and doing that. And then, of course, I thought that was funny. You were saying that. I never thought of this, but, it's funny that priests are kind of like software. They have to be installed. It's really odd to me. It's like, what operating system
regularly as well?
Right. What operating system are we on this time? So
Vatican 2.0.
Vatican OS, VOS. I don't know. Anyway, for me, not a whole lot has happened recently. I did mention in the last episode that I recorded for a theme park and I recorded for a big movie, and I have since revealed that the movie was Beetlejuice, or which is the sequel to Beetlejuice 1, which comes out, I think, in September, which is really cool. So that was a fun project I got to work on back a month or so ago, maybe longer than that now at this point. So there was that. I guess recently, I'm just, as of this week, wrapping up a film score that I've been working on for a few months. This is a short film for a friend of mine, and it's going well. It's called Sweet Santa Barbara Brown, and I've mentioned it to you guys separately. But it's sort of the story of the Harlem Globetrotters. There was an incident in the 1980s where they were racially profiled and out in Santa Barbara, actually. And it's kind of just sort of telling that story that's kind of been ongoing through our culture. And just to say that it hasn't been a more recent thing. It's been going on for decades. And anyway, it's a great little 10-15 minute film. And at the end of it, I had actually written a song to sort of sum up the theme of the film. And anyway, that was all recorded recently. So I recorded my choir, I recorded a lead vocalist. And so it's kind of all coming together, and it sounds much more professional than I feel like it is, but I'm doing the best I can to make it sound as
that's great.
Studio quality as I can do it. So anyway, so that's kind of been a fun thing. I think for me more so it's this point in time in the year is calming down as we get into the summertime. So I normally work at a school, and so that's kind of ending now. Church things kind of wrap up now. But this summer I have a lot of projects planned. I'm doing a concert, silent film concert, actually. So you mentioned the silent film concert you did. I'm doing one in June. I have not yet revealed the film for that, but that will be at my church here. So a classical organ. We're going to hang a giant canvas white screen above the organ and project a film on top of that. So that'll be fun. And then I'm actually going to begin working on an album, a cinematic sort of organ album this summer as well. So there's some things coming there, as far as check-ins of past things. It's calming down, but the summertime is going to have a lot of projects that are going to be fun to get involved in. So yes. How about you, Jared?
When you say album of organ music, is this going to be a recorded album, or is this going to be a compositional album?
It's going to be both. So it's my last album that I did last year was a mixture of live recorded acoustic pipe organ with 80s retro synthesizers, and so it's a very a different kind of sound, but I think it worked really well. So it's mixing acoustic and electronic together. This one's going to be more acoustic across the board, but using a lot of very old instruments and anyway, some cinematic effects as well. So it'll be kind of a more of a sort of like a soundtrack to a film that doesn't exist kind of thing. So so that's kind of my thinking there. Anyway,
cool. Very exciting. We're looking forward to that. Wonderful.
Yes.
Jerry, what have you been up to?
What have I been up to? Goodness gracious. Well, I know last time we talked, I was preparing for, and therefore we have survived, St. John's Passion. I'm actually doing some work editing down the final. We made some recordings of that, but that was a lot of fun. I mean, it's just remarkable that we have a lot of talent in the region here, and we all get to come together and do something like that. And as you both predicted, that was quite the play, shall we say. There was just a lot of music. It's just you kind of start at the beginning and you were just pretty much playing through the whole thing. We did something similar with Messiah last year. So the goal here is with the whatever free time I have, kind of working behind the scenes to rebalance and edit that audio and get that out there. And then, of course, just keeping busy with work. And my other side project is Stanford. So that is continuing. And I'm currently delving into the world of Stanford's non-church music that has been transcribed for the organ, and more to follow on that. But that's kind of the fun stuff that's keeping me busy at the moment.
Aren't you transcribing something yourself?
Oh, maybe, yes. That is something is happening. Of course, it hasn't been officially revealed what I am transcribing yet.
Ooh.
So people are going to have to follow along for that. But yes, it is a goal of mine, in addition to learning ideally all of his published works, if I can, this year. We shall see how that goes, to contribute a little something. So there are two existing transcriptions of his incidental music for plays, which I was chatting offline with Aaron about this. It's kind of overlaps a little bit, kind of the precursor to film music in a way. This was this was non-opera. These were stage plays, and you had this orchestral music. So there are two pieces which survive as organ transcriptions. So they are coming up soon on the channel. But I am going to be adding something else from his stage work, which I think is going to be a whole lot of fun and connects with my Irish roots. And may even connect us with today's topics and influences and whatnot. But anyhow,
I know what it's going to be. I'm not going to say anything now. Okay.
Very cool.
When you said Irish, I knew exactly what you meant there, but I'm not going to say anything. Okay.
Excellent. Excellent.
Well, that's going to be good.
It. That's what I've been up to.
And now for our main topic.
What are some of the things that made us the musicians we are today? So who wants to jump on that first?
Oh my goodness. I think we go with the youngest person first, shall we?
Oh man. Well, that's going to be the most varied. But
excellent. The spice of life and whatnot.
Yeah, the things that influenced
Just don't say
me.
the Spice Girls and we'll be fine.
Or do. That's okay
or
too.
Or do. It could be. That was my childhood. No, I think for myself, it's, I think we were all trained. We talked about this before. We've been trained in sort of the classical realm. So we kind of probably all had to play Bach. We all had to play probably Buxtehude, Mendelssohn, all of that era. Mm-hmm. When I was a little kid and began taking piano lessons, I was really drawn to. I was trying to think of the sort of the first composer that drew me in, and I think for me that was Beethoven. Back when I was a little kid, and I think just looking back on it and thinking about why I liked his music so much, I think it was the fact that you could tell he really struggled. He wasn't perfect, and I liked that. You could see there. If you look at his manuscripts, there's always scribbles and things. He just hated half the things he was writing, and anyway, So also when I was a little kid and learning to improvise, I would be practicing. I say that in air quotes, in the living room on the piano, and my mom would be making dinner, and I would play to a point where I didn't learn the next section, and I would improvise in the style of Beethoven, and nobody knew the difference. And so it was like I was practicing as if I knew the piece, how it was going on. But yeah, so that was kind of my early stages of that. I think Beethoven was probably a big influence. But as I got into high school and as I got into later on and, college and things, it kind of jumped. As I was improvising more, I was playing things by ear and learning stuff off the radio, which at the time, you mentioned the Spice Girls, but that was, I didn't play them, but that was, it was on the radio all the time. That and the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and all those boy bands. And anyway, that was that era. But I really grew an interest in high school in sort of some of the guys who were doing piano, who were in rock and roll, but were pianists. Because most people in rock and roll are guitarists, and they've got their axe and they play that, and that's what gets all the girls. And but then I discovered that there's actual pianist doing these things and also getting all the girls. And so it was people like Billy Joel and Elton John, which is a different case, getting all the guys, but that's still what it was. Billy Joel, of course, Steve Winwood was another big one, but then I would go back and listening to Motown and R&B and Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder. And it was just really, really cool to see that there was somebody doing or playing the instrument that I was playing and really just having a lot of fun. And so I really was drawn to more of that in my high school years. And so that began to become a huge influence on my improvisation, and which then translated into my organ music when I'd improvise in the organ. So, but I tend to find that a lot of the music that I play draws from those time periods, which I guess is talking about maybe the 60s through early 80s maybe, and even to today. But that really does influence me as far as harmony and that kind of stuff. Now, as far as outside the piano realm, another couple groups that I really thought of from my college years were sort of the prog rock groups. So I was really into Genesis for a long time, and Yes, another one with Rick Wakeman, who's an organist. And so those were kind of also big influences on me. But those would be like, you put a record on it, it was like a 20-minute long song, and it was just kind of how that would go. But as far as taking things like rock and changing meters and changing keys and all these things you could do in that kind of music, which was kind of forcing together the classical and the popular music world together, which I really liked a lot. So prog rock was a big thing for me in college. And then I was going to also mention, this is a huge range here, but I also mention my film music background too. So when I was a little kid, apart from the piano stuff, me sort of having a moment when I was a kid, I don't remember what age it was, but where I really knew what I wanted to do with my life. I knew I wanted to write music for movies and TV. The film that really got me into that was Back to the Future, which was 1985. And that's the composer for that film was Alan Silvestri. And if you don't know the name Alan Silvestri, you've heard his music. He wrote Forrest Gump, Castaway, the movie Contact. He did the Avengers film that came out a few years ago. So he's very well known, and but of course that then opens up a whole world of other film composers. Bernard Herrmann, was an amazing composer, and going back as far as Eric Korngold, who was also a classical composer, and then getting into more modern day, James Newton Howard and John Powell is another great composer like today, and of course the greatest of all of them that's still living with us today is John Williams at 92 now, I think he is. So yeah, it's kind of amazing. And I think for me that the film world, is kind of in my mind, at least, is kind of the last Wild West of symphonic music that's still around. Because, if you try to think, you could go to any public school anywhere and ask the students, what's the most famous composer living today? And 40, 50 years ago, you would have probably said Leonard Bernstein or Aaron Copland. You would have names you could have given, but they're gone. And people don't think film world when you think of symphonic composers, but it really is. Yep. And actually the most famous composer living today is John Williams. I mean, he's the most famous symphonic composer. And so that's the film world that's literally being that. So in my world, it's been just squishing together my influences from piano, from the classical stage through, the rock and roll stuff and the Motown and the R&B stuff and the blues stuff. And then getting into today with film music, it's just kind of all meshed together. And I know that there's not any organist mentioned there. I was supposed to mention organ influences and all that. But if I'm thinking about that kind of also, we mentioned this in the last podcast, Lefebvre Whaley probably is one of my top ones as far as what he did for the organ world. And he was squishing opera music in with church music and dance music with church music of the time. And so I think those kind of fusion composers that sort of can blend things together. Ray Charles did the same thing. I mean, he was taking gospel music and making it popular. And so I think for me, it's really hard to say, these are the top five, but it's kind of a meshing of all together. But organist wise, I don't have a lot of organist composers that really influence my current output. But I think that thing, just like with Beethoven, who was deaf and couldn't hear anything, he was in his own world. I think kind of in the same way, I think of myself where I'm not listening to other organists of centuries past and just doing my own thing. So blocking it all out and trying to be original in some way. So anyway, that's a long story short, but that's my long list of influences there. So yes,
that is a very fascinating list of it's a very eclectic bunch as well. Yeah. Funnily enough, I think if you were to ask me the same question, and you probably are about to, there wouldn't be much difference in my case. Let me try to do the same kind of thing. I'll try and make it a little more organ contented.
Go ahead, yes.
Let me see. But no, if I go all the way back, my first musical influences were my great uncle, or was my great uncle. He was a Scottish accordionist and jazz piano player.
Ooh,
and we had a piano
accordionist
at home, and Uncle George would come round and play, and he would play this most amazing Fats Waller style stride piano, and he could play it perfectly. Not like a lot of people today who try to recreate it. Now, he could actually, he had big hands, he could do the proper stuff, and he would thrash the piano for hours. He didn't have a piano at home anymore, so he loved coming round to ours. He could sit and play the piano for hours on end of an evening. We would feed and water him, and he would keep on playing. And I was always fascinated by this. So when I started taking piano lessons at a very early age, learning the basics, all the sort of the easy peasy stuff that you have to do, it was still in the back of my mind, I want to be able to play like Uncle George. And as I got older and my hands got a little bit bigger, Uncle George started showing me how all these things worked. And he introduced me to written music and that style. Now, at the time, there weren't really any sort of transcriptions of stride piano, Fats Waller, James P. Johnson, that kind of stuff. There weren't really any around. So he was just saying, listen to the recording. Now, here's how he did it. And then he would show me what was going on, kind of thing. But he did give me some sheet music to go away and practice. And it was ragtime music. It was Scott Joplin and Henry Lodge and, those composers. And I got into this kind of crazy music that no one else was into. I mean, at my age, we're talking here the late 70s, early 80s. And, well, let's face it, the music of the 80s, a lot of people love the music of the 80s, but no, it's awful. It's rubbish, all of it.
How dare you? How dare you?
With perhaps the exception of a few very, very good bands, most of it has nothing to do with musicians. It was just a bunch of producers who would put bands together and sell stuff. That was it. It was just commerce. But, there are some good stuff. There is some good stuff in there. Anyway, we'll on to that another day. So this was the piano, and nothing else. Now, unlike you, I never liked Beethoven. I always found Beethoven fantastically boring. I never liked Beethoven. In the same way, though, I always thought Mozart was very precocious, and I didn't like Mozart either. I loved the keyboard music of Haydn. I thought Haydn's music was absolutely wonderful. Haydn knows how to write a really good tune. And actually, I found this later in life as well, when I started working with choirs as well. If you want to work with choirs and do classical, and I mean historically classical period, masses and choir music and things like that, ignore the Mozart stuff, the Mozart masses. Yeah. Go for Haydn's masses. They're much easier to sing. Haydn was writing for singers. Yeah. Wonderful. So, as when I went to study music and found out about, the way he was composing and things like that, Haydn was a much, much, much more talented composer and musician than his friend Wolfgang Amadeus was. But anyway, that's another thing. So I was really into Haydn and the Scarlattis and that kind of stuff. If you want to go a bit further, I was never really into Bach. Still am not to this day. I don't know. Bach was always far too complicated for me. All this bloody counterpoint. What's that all about? I'm not a counterpoint person at all. If forced at gunpoint, yes, I will play fugues and things like that. But no, it's not my natural métier. Anyway, and then later in life, I took up another instrument. I took up the trombone. So I was still, through Uncle George's influence, it was all about jazz. I wasn't interested in classical trombone. It was only sort of ever, I hate the terms trad jazz or Dixieland jazz. I call it classic jazz. It sounds so much nicer.
Glenn Miller kind of stuff?
No. Go back to Louis Armstrong and go. Go back to the 20s and go right back to the beginning. King Oliver, all that kind of King Oliver,
I gotcha.
Louis Armstrong, all the way back. And all those sort of, those little jazz bands. Now, of course, in Great Britain, there was a resurgence of that in the 50s and then 60s. Acker, Kenny Ball, all those guys. And they were taking the old classic jazz style of the 20s and they were sort of, I wouldn't say modernizing it, but they were sort of recreating it, making it popular again. And that was absolutely wonderful. So I got into that kind of music, listening to that for a while. And then something at some point in my musical career got me off on a complete tangent and I discovered the music of the Beatles. And of course, the Beatles were long gone by the time I was around. And I think what it was at home, music we heard at home was very bizarre. We never had radio playing. My dad always had records. My dad would always put records on. And all these records are old rock and roll. It was all Chuck Berry and, it was good old-fashioned rock and roll from the 50s. My mum, however, was into Elvis. So we would be listening to Elvis on one side. My dad would be listening to the Chuck Berry kind of thing. So I was getting all this sort of boogie and blues and rock and roll, that kind of stuff in the background. And then at some point, I heard something. It must have been on the radio. I don't know. But this tune by the Beatles. I can't remember what the tune was at the time, but I thought, oh, who's that? And then I discovered the Beatles, and off I went on this mad Beatles trip, which took me all throughout my sort of school ages. I remember doing school projects on the Beatles, and then their influences. They were influenced by Chuck Berry, and I was always interested. Where did all this come from?
Right.
Where did So if the Beatles played this kind of music, they learned it from, let's say, just an example, Chuck Berry. Where did Chuck Berry learn it from? Well, he got it from here and blah, 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 blah. And you sort of work your way back throughout history and keep going. Now, moving forwards, the organ still isn't part of this, by the way. This is still all the other stuff. I was on a trip with my grandmother. I think I mentioned this last time or maybe the time before. On a trip to Blackpool, of all places, with my grandmother, and we went to visit the famous Blackpool Tower, and which houses, of course, that famous Wurlitzer theatre organ. And I'd already sort of come across this radio program on BBC Radio 2, The Organist Entertains, hosted by Nigel Ogden. Jerry, I know you used to listen to that as well. And I was always fascinated by the sound of these sort of bizarre instruments. Didn't really sort of think about it that, oh my goodness, I want to do that. Not yet. But then I went to hear this thing live, and just the sheer sound of this instrument in this enormous ballroom, it just hooked me. Oh my God, I was completely hooked. So after that trip, we came home, and I just would not stop talking about the organ. And my parents decided, well, hold on, maybe he is actually interested in this. He can play the piano. He's got this little trombone, and maybe there's something, maybe there's something here. And we invested in one of those Yamaha Electone electronic organs. Oh, remember them? And we invested in one of those with a 1-octave pedal board down the bottom end there, the little brown and black pedals, the offset keyboards and things like that. And I was in seventh heaven. And after that point, that's the only thing I was interested in. And every kind of music I'd been hearing up until that point, whether it was my rock and roll music, whether it was the Beatles, whether it was old jazz music, I wanted to play it on this little instrument. And I did. And they couldn't stop me. And I got all of those, remember the busker books? Remember them? Little sort of ring-bound busker books. Sort of, I'm not sure what size they were, but little sort of pocket-sized books with a ring binder, and you just sort of open them up and you had every tune. Busker's book of Beatles hits, the Busker's book of, I don't know, whatever it was, any kind of style. And I collected all of these books madly. All of my pocket money was spent on these things. And I went through every page, learning these tunes on the organ, teaching myself harmony, because it was just a lead sheet, basically. So teaching myself harmony, playing all these tunes. And then that's when at some point someone said, maybe you should be taking organ lessons and learn to do this properly. And I've told this story many times, but then I was introduced to the cathedral organist in Inverness and played some ragtime music to him on the organ, which he thought was hilarious. But he was open to it, which is amazing. I think, back in those days, you wouldn't necessarily have expected them to be open to it. Possibly even today, a lot of them wouldn't be open to it,
Very true.
But I was very lucky he was open to it. He took me under his wing and taught me the basics of classical organ. And took me through my grade exams. Remember them? The Associated Board grade exams.
Yes.
He put me straight in at grade 7 on the organ. We did grade 7, we did grade 8. And then I went off to university. Then I went off to university and I discovered something else, and all of that kind of active stuff took a bit of a background. And here's the funny thing: when I went off to university, and of course I was studying music, it wasn't necessarily performance of music that I was studying. I mean, there was an element of performance, of course, there is in any music studies, but it was mainly sort of the academic side of things, which is, of course, fascinating. And I've always been a bit of a sort of musical engineer. I want to know how things work. So, studying the academics of music is great. Get to know why people wrote things in this way, blah, blah, blah. And but I was very lucky. At a bizarre party during the Edinburgh Festival, I met a rather famous musician from the United Kingdom at a party, and it was like sort of the Harlem of the 1920s, these rent parties. There were people just piling into somebody's flat. There was a piano in the corner. I was bopping away on the piano doing some boogie woogie, and suddenly this guy came and sat next to me, and it happened to, I'm not going to mention names, but it happened to be a very famous piano player who was in town with his band performing a concert, and we sat and we played boogie woogie together. And through that meeting that night, he then took me under his wing a little bit and used me for some arrangement kind of stuff. I wrote some music for him and his band. I did that kind of thing, and then in turn I got to meet a lot of other very interesting people from all around the music world, including, believe it or not, some of my heroes that I've mentioned from earlier in the story there, and got to work with them as well. So I could actually talk to them and say, so when you did that, you where did your influences come from? And I was engineering even then, getting the influences. And one band I haven't mentioned until now, but I think for me was definitely, Aaron, you've already mentioned sort of Rick Wakeman and things like that. But for me, it was ELO, Electric Light Orchestra, under Jeff Lynne.
Jeff Lynne, yeah.
And Jeff, I'm not going to say like me, but I think sort of historically and from this mindset, Jeff and I share a very similar outlook in sort of music history. Good tune, good arrangement, wonderful harmonic progressions, and just go for it, entertain. Yeah?
Yeah.
Music with, yes, you know what. And, when I discovered ELO, I thought, oh my God, this is it. So he's got the traditional instruments, the traditional style, but he's introducing synthesized stuff. He's introducing all kinds of wonderful things. And it's basically like, layer upon layer upon layer, which is what you're doing when you play the organ. It's layer upon layer upon layer. And I would say ELO was definitely one of my biggest influences ever, just for arrangements, compositions and arrangements, the kind of things that were going on. And again, it's symphonic, it's cinematic, etc., etc. It's big. And then, well, we're getting into things like the wall of sound now. If you're an organist, you are literally, you have a wall of sound in front of you if you're an organist. So we've got Phil Spector, or in the United Kingdom, Roy Wood. We've got, the wall of sound. And if you're an organist, you have your own personal wall of sound. So all of those influences, I don't know, they're all in my head at all times when I'm playing, and keep going and keep going and keep going. Is this what you meant, really Jerry, cool. when you said influences? were you actually referring of people that influenced us? For example, I was influenced by Virgil Fox. I was influenced by Carlo Curley. Is that the kind of thing you were actually after?
So in a sense, but actually this, and as I've just been listening to both of you, I think this is really the meat of where it is. Where does the music you play today, or when you sit down and you improvise, what's going on in your brain? And this has just been fascinating to hear all of this. And it's got me thinking about, my own musical journey. So I've been, it's really thanks to YouTube, the internet, social media, really since the pandemic that I've really been able to connect with musicians such as yourselves around the world, because my university and beyond career took me in such a tangent, really far away from music, that I've kind of been in a vacuum until the past few years. So there were influences for me, which I've been reflecting on, and a lot of it is kind of being rediscovered right now. And it's really, really fun. So I guess my beginnings in music were traditional Irish. So I started with the fiddle at age 4, and it was ultimately learning to play by ear and Irish tunes and whatnot. And then I'm in the Cayley bands. That was all up into the beginnings, I guess, right before high school. And then I independently had wanted to learn to play the piano because I just loved the sound of harmony. I started out with a monophonic instrument, just playing melodies, but I loved that somebody sitting at this machine with the black and white keys could, hit these keys, and all of a sudden, it's the same tune, but it sounds different, and you could totally change the vibe. So that was kind of what drew me in initially. Wanted to learn piano, and then high school, there was an opportunity to study organ as part of that. And Fraser, it's interesting. You said when you got the Electone, there was no stopping you. And I remember my organ teacher, Francis Moore, used to talk about being bitten by the organ bug. That is definitely something that happened. Fiddle, piano, everything then fell by the wayside as soon as I really got sucked into the organ world. So all through my secondary, high school years, it was doing the grade exams and whatnot. Now, the other thing that was interesting for me, because of this somewhat musically isolated upbringing I had. So I knew some friends who played organ, but in the west of Ireland, we didn't have a symphony orchestra, so I couldn't go hear all these concerts. So the only music I heard was recordings. And at the time, Ireland did have a classical music station that broadcast for like 12 hours a day. So I could hear some stuff on there, but my exposure to music beyond what I could play myself was somewhat limited. So, there were some of those early recordings. So I had a cassette tape, I remember, of Mozart that I really enjoyed, Mozart piano music. But then Beethoven, I really enjoyed Beethoven and the fire of Beethoven at the piano. And I learned a whole bunch of those sonatas. Yes, right there. So Aaron and I probably had similar things. Yes. Waiting for dinner to be cooked. I'm bashing out Beethoven piano sonatas, and Fraser is throwing up in the corner right now.
It goes on forever. Beethoven doesn't know how to stop. It just goes on and on.
Well, see, that's how I feel about Mozart, actually. I feel about Mozart's that way. It's like the guy was a kid his whole life and just kept noodling. And it's like, we've been here for 4 hours and this opera going to end.
Yeah, let's get on with it. Oh, it's so fun. But anyway, so Beethoven, piano, and then moving on to organ. But so really the only organ music I knew was the music I was learning for grades. I couldn't, it wasn't like I could go to Evensong and hear people play preludes and postludes or anything like that. It was purely what I was assigned to learn. And the other interesting thing, so we're also at a time before the internet exists, because remember, I'm middle-aged, I'm ancient. So I couldn't, Google and look up YouTube videos or recordings. So I do remember the process of going to the record store and, I'm learning some Bach prelude and fugues. I would order, 10 different performances of it and proceed to hate all 10 of those CDs. I've got boxes of CDs that I've ordered just for a single track. God bless streaming. It's certainly helped us in that regard. But anyhow, so that was a big phase of my life where I'm just learning classical music by the book, and really enjoying some of these big works. But I was always, much like what drew me to piano was the color, contrasting that to just purely the fiddle. I could play the fiddle, but if I sit at the piano, now there's the color of harmony. Now I'm drawn to the organ, and there's all the color of registration on top of the harmony as well. You're the one-man symphony orchestra. I don't need to travel to hear the orchestra because we can kind of do it. And my late organ teacher, Francis Moore, was very much a believer in that. We were always looking for melody lines to solo, even in works that never had that written. So it was always, where can we break out a solo line? Where can we add in a clarinet here? And, so that definitely influenced my thinking about the organ. But randomly purchasing CDs, there were 2 CDs I purchased. Actually, I should say 3, because there was one in the classical world. I fell down into the rabbit hole of Ton Koopman, who was creating waves in the early 2000s with a series of Bach recordings where he was playing on traditional instruments, and his ornamentation. Oh my gosh, it was just totally over the top, and it made people very angry. And I loved that. And he would play things with just so much energy and excitement. So bought all those CDs, and anytime I play a piece of Bach, you can be pretty sure that I'm playing Ton Koopman's ornaments that I've just ripped directly from his performances and written into my score. But rummaging around in the record stores looking for CDs to buy, and all of a sudden there's this HMV Classics organ class. Oh, what is this? And I discovered Wayne Marshall. Oh my God. Yes. My number one musical influence in the organ world was Wayne Marshall. And that CD, at least half of it was organ transcriptions. And it just blew my mind because this was my exposure to the world of organ transcriptions. Never heard it before that, because I'd heard some of these orchestral tunes on the radio, but the fact that this could be played convincingly on the organ, and I was hooked. So I became a transcription fanatic. And then also, you remember you mentioned The Organist Entertains. So I stumbled into a Phil Kelsall double CD of some of his greatest.
Wonderful.
And I also listened to that to death because it was just the variety of show tunes and transcriptions and everything from Highland Cathedral to Mac the Knife and all the rest from Blackpool. And it was just great. I loved that.
Wonderful.
And again, this is music that, I was just listening to by myself in isolation. It's like, this stuff is so great, but I had nobody to share that excitement and enthusiasm. So, it's all just kind of tucked away in my brain. And then during medical school, one of my best friends he was a very accomplished pianist. I was like, oh, we should do some organ and piano duets. And, you go to the music store, there was nothing available. So I'm obsessed about transcription. So I'm like, well, what are you learning? He's learning Rachmaninoff's Third. I'm like, all right, I'm going to transcribe it. And that became a 5-year project, which we did as final year med students, Insanity. When I look back now, what were we thinking? But that is kind of who I am today. And as I think about this recent chapter where I've been rediscovering my interest in music, it is the kind of organ music that I won't say was forbidden, but had completely fallen out of style when I was learning organ music. You would never see Hollins and Wolstenholme and whatnot on the ABRS grade exam syllabuses at the time. It was all
you still
Bach and Buxtehude and whatnot. So it's all of this wonderfully tuneful music and orchestral music. And again, as we mentioned at the start here, that's kind of what I'm looking into right now is orchestral transcriptions. And, I have so thoroughly enjoyed interacting with you guys in particular. Aaron has been planting seeds in my brain about other things that one can do with orchestras and whatnot. So that's for future reference.
Yes.
But for right now, if I look, I think the final thing I will say is traditional Irish music. So that was my roots. And I discovered kind of classical and moved on into this transcription-y world myself. And it was also just within the past 5 or 6 years that I was volunteered to be part of the local Celtic Irish group. So the fiddle came back out after 20 years. And without question, over the past few years, I've been falling in love all over again with my Irish traditional heritage. So I would say where I am today, it is orchestral transcriptions on the organ, making the organ exciting and colorful and maybe infusing some of that Celtic spirit as well, which is, the Stanford Project. So
you are basically the modern Stanford, in other words.
Oh, I would never put myself in that bucket. Well, it's only since coming to the United States that I actually heard theater organs for real. Prior to that, I've never heard Blackpool in person. Of course, now, thanks to YouTube, I've seen videos of him play and everything. It's just so much fun.
It's just over the top, wonderful.
Yes. And of course, then hearing Fraser and Aaron play in person, oh my gosh, it's just so amazing. Just amazing stuff. So someday, when I grow up, I want to be able to play theater organ.
So do I.
None of us will ever grow up, and that's the beauty of our lives.
Yeah. It is really cool, though. I was going to say, none of us have really, as influences go, we haven't gone to the traditional organ composers and things that most people would go to. I think is
weird, isn't it?
We didn't say Mendelssohn. We didn't say, Bach as being our main influence. And you think every organist would say Bach, but it's like it was part of we've heard it and we learned pieces, but that wasn't sort of our foundation behind everything that we did. And he was the same way. He grew up and didn't have Bach to have a foundation. He just he did what he wanted to do. And, and I think that's the thing we lose a lot is in today's, we think that these people of centuries past, they knew they were legends and they had themselves to be the pedestals of everything, but they were doing exactly what we're doing. And they had people that they like to listen to or go to concerts and hear. And that's what influenced them. And, I think it's important that we humanize a lot of these people because they were just like we are. And,
exactly.
But it is really cool. I mean, I think if you were to have any, pretty much, I would say across the board, any other organ podcast, the list of influences would be much more refined to certain centuries, and
that list of 10 names that we brought up before.
Yeah, exactly. The top 10.
Yes.
So
yes.
How cool.
I have an interesting anecdote there. When I was studying music, I was sitting at the organ waiting for the teacher to arrive, and I was playing my way through at the time. I think it was the first movement of Vidor 6 G minor. I think it was the first, but it was something like that. And I was just sort of noodling my way through it, not paying much attention to exactly what was going on. It was on the organ desk. Someone else had been playing it. And the teacher arrived and he said, "Oh, what on earth do you want to play that for?" Which I thought was rather bizarre. And I said, "Well, it's brilliant. I love it." And he said, No. We're going to be learning Bach, something or other, E minor, wedge fugue, and things like that. And I remember turning to him and sort of saying, "Well, why?" And he said, well, you have to learn Bach's music. And I said, "Yes, again, why?" And he just looked at me and he said, Theoretically, that's a good question. I don't know. I just, everyone assumes you're an organist, so you have to learn the works of Bach. But yes, you're quite right. Why do we have to? And then we didn't play a note that day. We just sat for an hour and talked about why would you want to learn anything. And he sort of said, well, what do you want to learn? I said, I want to learn this. I want to learn Vidor. I want to learn that. I heard the organist the other day playing something from Howells. I thought it was beautiful. And then there's, oh my goodness, I want to learn all of this beautiful, harmonic, wonderful stuff. That's what I want to learn. And I can do it. I understand it. I don't understand all this counterpoint Bach nonsense. I want to play this kind of stuff. So we changed track completely. We didn't even bother with anything Baroque again. We just moved into sort of the world of French Romantic.
Oh, how fantastic that he was open to that. That is great.
He was wonderful. He was absolutely wonderful. Yeah. And we opened into these things. And I learned most of Howell's stuff. I learned a fair bit of Vidor, some Vierne, all of those things. And I loved every minute of it. I thought, this is wonderful. And you could really... It's not even just the loud stuff. Everyone thinks organists just want to play loud, tooty all the time. Mm. That is fun, and that's why I'm probably deaf in my right ear these days. But it's not. But we also love the quiet stuff as well. The Adagio movement of Vierne's Sixth Symphony. Oh my God! It's one of the most beautiful pieces of music ever. Yeah. Or anything by Howells, or anything by Maurice de Roufflet, of course. It's just delish.
But that is so true. The contrast between the loud and the quiet. So I've actually been dealing with that challenge as I'm preparing for a little recording here myself. It's just the whole dynamic range, because I'm using a big sample set and the organ is quiet and then the organ gets really loud, and how you deal with all of that. And I think that might be an interesting transition to a segment that we are going to introduce in this episode called Stop Gear. So, Stop Gear is our new segment where we talk about some of the fun toys that organists and musicians love, particularly in the technology world. So, organs have always been about engineering. They're just amazing machines. And in the modern era where we have technology, now there is just so many more layers to this. So, we are probably going to be talking about Hauptwerk and our computers. But we were talking about loud and soft and recording challenges. And right before our last podcast, there were some new updates to recording technology and handheld recorders. And Aaron and I are the proud owners of Zoom's latest handheld recorder, the H4 Essential, or as we say in America, the H4 Essential. The F6 was the first time that Zoom introduced the technology we were going to talk about, this 32-bit float. But the F6 is kind of their Rolls-Royce field recorder. It's an amazing product, and we're looking forward to seeing what Fraser gets up to it. I think it's the F6 because F is for Fraser, right? What does H stand for, Aaron?
Airy.
I don't know, but I was going to say it's just H speech. So, I think to use it that way. But
so briefly, where the bit depth is important, it's the dynamic range, the difference between the louds and the softs. And with a traditional recorder, you would go into the space, or you would sit in front of your guitar or whatnot, and you had to dial the levels. There was this little adjuster that you had to use to get the input from the microphone sitting in the happy space, setting that sensitivity in the happy space. And this would make me sad when I would record an organ concert and the howls is sounding wonderful, and then we get to the top of that big old crescendo and it's just all the clipping, and that cannot be repaired, cannot be recovered in post-production. Some of our listeners who may be photography aficionados, this is like shooting photos in RAW, where you think about with traditional photography, the sky might be blown out or too bright and the background is underexposed. So you have modern cameras that similarly have a wide dynamic range, and you can come back and you can fiddle about with things and improve things after the fact. So this is an audio godsend. And as I said, I think for organists, and especially, when I think about myself, if I was starting out my organ journey right now, having a tool, the Zoom H4 Essential, is relatively inexpensive. It's got two good stereo onboard mics and two inputs that you can plug in real mics. So you can bring that and just plop it in the church and press record. And that as long as there's red lights and you've got battery and you've got an SD card in it, you're going to have a good recording. Nothing to worry about. So it really is amazing stuff. So I give Stop Gear seal of approval, but I certainly give the 32-bit float technology and these new recorders my absolute seal of approval. What do you guys think?
It's absolutely amazing. It really is. And for the world of sampling, digital sampling. Now I'm going to I'm going to be getting out and about to start sampling some organs.
Very exciting.
Not necessarily to, turn them into Hauptwerk sample sets at first, but I just want to understand how this all works. But with the joys of 32-bit float recording, I can just set the recorder there. I've got my 6 microphones at various places throughout the church plugged into the same recorder, so I don't have latency issues, any of that nonsense. I just plug it in, press record. I have got 6 samples recorded at 32-bit float. I go back to my computer. I can raise and lower those samples as I need to blend the levels, and I'm not introducing any background noise that shouldn't be there. And that, I think, that's going to be the most amazing part of it. Just, the recording levels, that's witchcraft, but the noise floor part of it, that for me is the real sorcery.
Yeah, it really is. Amazing stuff.
And while you've been discussing 32-bit float, I've been having a root beer float, so I'm just totally out of this. Anyway,
a root beer float?
I had
does
so little
to contribute. Does that count as day drinking?
It's somewhere. Yeah, 5 o'clock. Anyway, it's one of those things. But I think, Fraser, you having the F6 one, having that many inputs is what makes it the perfect sampling device. Because there's so many other things you've got to worry about when you're recording an organ, where you're going to put the microphones, all that stuff. This is the fact of having to set individual levels is just so much extra time, and the ability to just hit go, just let it do its thing is game changer.
Well, thank you all for tuning in. That has been Stop It, where we have gone over our influences and some fun technology. What are we going to talk about next month, guys?
Well, we keep talking about this organ, this instrument, the organ, but we're not actually talking about the thing that brought us together. And that is the modern sampled digital thing called Hauptwerk that brought us all together. Maybe we should talk a little bit about Hauptwerk and or even the history. Where did it come from? Move back in time, the sort of, not necessarily the pipe organ, but the plug-in organ, and where that came from.
The electric organ and toasters. I think there's a lot of exciting stuff to talk about there.
Kitchen appliances.
Yes, indeed.
All right.
Kitchen. Is a Hammond organ a kitchen appliance?
A blender, maybe?
Yes,
I don't know.
Indeed. Yes, it's a blender, and you could fry your eggs on it too. Excellent.
Yes.
You could use it to make cocktails as well with all those spinning parts. Yeah.
That's right.
Outstanding. Well, tune in next month for a discussion of the history of the electric organ. We're looking forward to it. So until then, I'm Jerry Martin.
I'm Fraser Garchaw.
And I am Aaron Shows.
And this has been
Stop It.